may I have a thumbs up, comments in the chat box on whether you can see my slide. May I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Okay, so good morning. My name is Bambo Adebowale, and as Mr. Yusuf said, I'm a former employee of quite a number of diverse organizations, but currently I operate as a director and dean of the Faith School of Entrepreneurship of Faith Foundation, which was set up 23 years ago. I had been volunteering for 22 of those years. I'm now director and dean, having stepped back from corporate Nigeria 3 years ago, hoping that I would not need to be productive and I could just go into the world and enjoy myself. But here we are dealing with productivity in a country that's full of a lot of variables that we have to deal with. I have prepared some slides which are mainly for guiding me and hopefully for guiding you in your thinking and in your questions. And I will probably like to say that they are not backed by scientific analysis. I believe that a lot of things that we do can still be done without scientific analysis, but I'll try to bring analysis into it a bit. Now, part of the reason why I mentioned where I had worked is that in many of the areas where I had worked, productivity was a big issue. I worked for the UK Inland Revenue. I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, which then became, for Coopers and Lybrand, which then became PricewaterhouseCoopers, which we all know now as PwC. I had worked for General Electric, and then I worked for Mitsubishi Corporation, heading up the businesses in Nigeria and Ghana. And you can imagine that in every one of those areas, your performance and your productivity would be key, not only in delivering what needs to be done, but also to ensure that the organization meets its targets, that the metrics are right, that the optics are beautiful, and that those who are investing in our various organizations are getting value for money. So a starting point will be, what is VUCA? And VUCA is one thing that we've now used to the point that it's almost cliched now. Everybody talks about VUCA, even those who cannot read and write talk about VUCA. VUCA, and I would like to believe that many of you know what VUCA is being in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. And what are those things? Volatility basically means that things are not stable. Today, it's one way, tomorrow, it's another way. So for instance, I'll say that our currency is volatile because it keeps on going up and down. And that, for me, leads to the next one in the VUCA acronym, which is the uncertainty. You are not sure of where things are going. And not being sure means that you cannot plan. If you cannot plan, then it's going to be difficult for you to budget. If you cannot budget, how are you going to fund? And if you cannot fund, how are you going to continue to operate in your various businesses? In addition to that, we have the complexity. The complexity could be as simple as, for those of you working in Lagos, the Third Mainland Bridge is closed. You have to take an alternative route, which is the second bridge, the Eco Bridge. And then you have to deal with, okay, it's closed up to a stage, or it's closed all the way. Is it the right-hand lane that's closed or the left-hand lane? And somebody will tell you, oh, simple, it's very simple. Just do a U-turn when you get to Adebowale, and then go 2 streets down up to Kano Street and do a left onto Calabar Street. And you are wondering, Google Map should sort that all out. But the instructions are probably more accurate than Google Map, because Google Map did not pick up the fact that at the time that you were going to use the road, the boys on those streets are decided to play street soccer. So that brings an additional variable to your permutations and your calculations. In the midst of all that is the ambiguity, where you are not sure whether a yes means yes, whether a no means no, or whether a yes means it's a it's a definite maybe. But what I'll say is this. It's not today that we've been dealing in a VUCA situation. VUCA was something that only came about maybe about 40 years ago, because it was an acronym that was created by two individuals, Warren Bennis and Bert Nanos. And I will probably say that if you can't read up on their work, at least look at the YouTube clips on these gentlemen and what they came up with, because it was really to describe a lot of things in a world where the gamut of things were changing and it was being affected by businesses. But VUCA itself never really came into our vocabulary until maybe about 3 to 5 years ago. Up to then, it was being used in places like the military to describe, how the world would be if the Cold War became a hot war. So it's not that VUCA is new to us. It's just that we've never really taken it as an issue that should be dealt with, an issue that we should focus attention on, and an issue that we should deal with. But consider this. We are dealing with food insecurity. I understand that the bag of rice is now 72,000 naira. Maybe a year ago, I think it was maybe 20 or 18,000. There's insecurity. It's not just people being attacked in traffic anymore these days. Bandits are going into palaces. So you're having to deal with that. That's uncertainty when you're not sure whether you can deliver your last mile. You're not sure whether your staff can get to the office. Those are dealing with uncertainties. There are the inflationary pressures. We've got inflation now north of 28%. It's probably going to be 30% if nothing happens. And barely a year ago, we were hovering around the 23% and saying it was bad. Now, inflation and the temperature are almost competing to see which one can go higher. And even temperature itself creates a lot of complexities. Think about those who need to keep their food fresh. Think about those who need to operate in a cool environment. Think of the amount of air conditioning that you need when it's hot. And then you have to deal with power. It itself is uncertain because you're never sure when you're going to get it or whether you're not. But at least, if you're a serious business person, if you're a serious corporate organization, you will have backup power to the extent that your generator or your inverters then become your main source of power. The national grid becomes the backup because the grid, at least if I recollect, has crashed twice this year. And that's even when we're generating less than 6,000 megawatts. 6,000 megawatts is really what Lagos State should be using, not the whole of a country of 200 million people. And you can understand why these are things that need to be taken into consideration when you are measuring productivity and I dare say performance. And then you've got to deal with infrastructure or the lack of infrastructure. So VUCA is not something that is new. And I'll go one step to say, if you think of the business theory analysis, the good old pestle. If you look at pestle well, and it's not a mistake that this thing is standing on its side, it's because I deliberately put it on its side so that you can see that things are not the way they should be. If you go through a pestle analysis, you're really talking about things that are VUCAized. So that's my own choice of words for today. Because if you're looking at political stability or instability, corruption, foreign trade policy or lack of policy, you're talking about uncertainty. The African Free Trade Agreement has signed or has been signed. It's in effect in some countries. It's not in effect to some countries. That means there's uncertainty. You don't know how it's been applied. You got a government who said or who have informed us that subsidy has been withdrawn. And we are asking, has it been? Well, maybe it's not been. Maybe it's been withdrawn to some extent. We heard the president make a comment, which many of us celebrated when he said, oil subsidy is gone. It was weeks later that the experts then started to tell us that you can't just do it like that. There needs to be a process. We've already put the cart before the horse. And then ambiguity came in, because then we needed to figure out whether we were on the right trajectory, whether it was being deployed correctly or not. And if you look at other areas in the personal analysis, you'll find out that everything speaks to it being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Environmental issues. A few weeks ago, I believe the government of Lagos State, one of the states in Nigeria, brought in a law to say that styrofoam was being banned. The comment was a welcome one. The way it was made was ambiguous. The way it's going to be put in place is complex, because you need to know, does that affect styrofoam that has already been produced or styrofoam that is about to be produced? What happens to the equipment? What about the business? And that brings us right smack into the middle of productivity. So if I'm the person who's meant to be buying or selling styrofoam, and the government has made a law that I need to obey, does that mean I have not performed? Does that mean when you do my appraisal, I'm going to be scored a 0 or a 1 rather than a 5 for something that is totally out of my own control? And those are the things that I would like us to think about when we are thinking about the VUCA economy or the VUCA environment and the measurements of productivity, because it is important that we know that productivity measures are a collection of variables. Are we talking about total output divided by total input to give you, your amount of productivity? Are we talking about you being able to close a deal? And if when you were about to close the deal, the power went, your system crashed, does that mean that you are not productive, or are you operating in an environment where you have no call over? Food for thought, ladies and gentlemen. And remember climate change, not just the amount of coverage on how many people went for the climate change conference, but does anybody remember what was actually discussed? Is everybody clear about what was discussed? So if you are in charge of recycling in your organization and you're not sure of what was discussed at the COP conference, or even the social development goals, which are about to end because they had a 30-year lifespan, if you don't understand them, would you be considered to be unproductive? Or would it be you are operating in an environment where you have no control of? Because if you remember the good old SWOT analysis, the strengths and the weaknesses tend to be internal to your organization or to you as an individual. The opportunities and the threats are usually external. So if an area boy, and an area boy will be a local thug who is pumped up on cheap alcohol, disrupts the delivery of your goods to your customer, will you, the sales manager, be deemed to be unproductive? Or will you say, well, there were a number of factors that should be taken into consideration? These are things that we need to think of and be aware of. I've only got 6 slides, and I'm onto my 4th slide now, so that will give us opportunity to talk and to engage. Then we've got productivity itself, because if you think about it, when I was head of business, and even now when I'm dean of a school, what we teach the entrepreneurs is that your ideas need to be viable. Your business or your product offering needs to be feasible. Your transactions need to be profitable. Your profits needs to be bankable. You need to be actually making profit, but also be putting money in the bank, not just making money. Not just making a profit, but there's no liquidity. Your business itself needs to be in a position where it has scalability. You should be able to grow your business from 1 shop to 2 shops, from 1 office to 2 offices, from 1 product line to 2 product lines, from 1 service offering to multiple service offerings. And they come with their own individual complexities. So which productivity metrics are we talking about? And how are they affected where you're operating in a volatile or just a complex? And it doesn't need to be all 4. It might just be the volatility. So think of all those operating in the Borno northeastern part of Nigeria, where security and the threats of banditry and terrorism is a constant. Do you reappraise the performance? Do you readjust your productivity metrics because of that area you're working in? And that's just the volatility. I tried to renew my license, which expired, and I paid for it. I couldn't do a capture because there was no power. The day that they had power, there was no internet. This was now a second trip. After I'd done all that, I got a phone call to say, oh, you need to get police reports and swear an affidavit to say that your license is defaced. And I said, well, my license is defaced. It's just that you cannot see it. Why do I need a police report to say my license is defaced? You can see my license. Well, this is the rule here. If you want your license, you have to do it. And a friend who said he had a defaced license said he did his in a different office and they didn't ask him. So you're now talking about ambiguity in explaining things, or is it just the complexity that things that should be so straightforward are difficult? But take that to productivity. If your driver or all your drivers in your organization who need to be marked on performance and delivering goods or collecting goods or picking up customers or taking people to the airport are caught in traffic, or the FRSC says the papers are not complete, or that you do not have a basket inside your vehicle, are you going to mark them down for being unproductive, or are you going to temper that with the rules that are brought in did not help them to understand what they needed to do? So I would say that that will be a discussion that I hopefully can have with you after I've finished my presentation. But just to add to the comments will be, how do you measure productivity itself? Do you want to measure it in terms of revenue per employee, profit per employee, or by organization, or by office, or by branch? If it were a supermarket, are we talking about sales per square meter? Are we talking about attendance at meetings or contributions at meetings? Are we talking about things like, your rate of absenteeism? Because if you think of oil and gas, they'll tell you that they've gone for, X number of hours without downtime because of health and safety, which would be a fantastic metric. Having said that, would that be the same if that same company did not drill 1 barrel of oil? Would you say that they're not productive? Because you've already said that they've not lost 1 hour of work, but they've not generated 1 barrel of crude either. So those are things that I would also say, put them on your table where you're going to measure productivity. My penultimate slide, actually, my last slide, are my views on productivity itself. And then I'll let Mr. Yusuf and his team from human managers and systems spec take over, is that it is what it is. There is no common denominator for measuring productivity. What is productive for you might not be productive for me. How you measure productivity might be different from how I measure. What is important is that you and your staff and line managers are all on the same page. You see it the same way, you understand it the same way. And at least if the ambiguity is on the outside, don't bring it on the inside. So if you are saying that attendance at meetings means you are productive, you cannot then say, well, you attended the meeting, but you attended late. Because I will say, well, attending on time was not part of the productivity measure. You said attend meeting, and I attended meeting. Now, whether I attended the meeting 5 minutes to the end of the meeting, or I joined 5 minutes before, is either irrelevant or it's splitting hairs. And those are the areas that I would like us to ponder on as to whether we are the ones who are actually creating some of these, at least ambiguities and complexities, because some of them should be fairly straightforward. One of the ways that I would say that you deal with it, either to improve or to increase productivity, is to allow staff to take responsibility at an early stage. I always say to my friends who are in government, especially the PAMSECs, that the problem that you have is that your staff have used all their career writing letters that say, I am directed to direct you. They never have ownership. They never take responsibility until when they become a director. So by the time they then get to a director level, They are now having to deal with those things that they didn't come across when they were reporting. And sometimes it is one of those big issues that you find out that you are now trying to teach a director how to, oh, my apologies. I've just seen a sign. Okay, I hope I haven't lost you now because I've just got someone say I should put my slides on full director mode. So let me just pause a minute and ask a question. How has the presentation gone? Because I am looking at slides, but I can't get the reaction of those of you in the room. Mr. Yusuf, please help me out here.
Very well received, loud and clear.
Okay, because I just noticed that there were 12 chats in the box and I was wondering whether they were for me, so I had to take my eyes off the screen in order to read the chats. So apologies if somebody had been trying to get a message to me and I didn't see the message. I'll try as much as possible to finish this so that we can actually engage, and I'll just leave my slides on so that I can have you speak to them. So what I was saying was to allow your staff to take responsibility. Let them draft the letter, then review it before it's sent out, so that you don't spend time, productive hours, or what should be productive hours, teaching them how to write a letter or correcting their mistakes or defending them because they've said something to the wrong person. If you do this at an early age, then he or she learns about it. It's almost like an apprenticeship scheme, not just in a kind of mechanic organization, but also in somewhere like an eatery. Because if I were to own an eatery, which is probably too late now, I would say that every member of staff would start by cleaning the floor. Then you start to fry the chips. Then you start to do the counter work where you serve customers and you operate the till. Then you can start to supervise, and then you start to manage, and then you start to direct. But if you do not have that opportunity and you come in at the top, if there's something that goes wrong with the fryer, because you were never at a level of operating the fryer, you won't know what to do. You won't know whether the person repairing it has overcharged, undercharged, or he doesn't even know anything about it. So I would say that for productivity, encourage your staff to take responsibility and ownership at an early stage. There's also a need for us to ask for opinions. You're going to get some silly ones, but it will be part of those things that you are then going to help to educate the individual. Because you can't tell me that I've underperformed where you haven't heard what I've got to say, because what I've got to say might actually be a short process to diluting this complexity, ambiguity that we are dealing with. People might have a better way to solve a problem of going into traffic in any part of Nigeria or West Africa, or being able to buy a cheaper flight ticket, because even buying a flight these days is a complex issue. For those of you who live in Nigeria, work in Nigeria, been to Nigeria, you realize that catching a flight is not always catching a flight. The flight has been scheduled for a particular time, and then it takes off a few times earlier, most of the time later. It makes it difficult for you to plan things. Does that then mean that you're not productive? But if you ask your staff, some of them might actually say that the best way to fly in Nigeria is to take your cash or your card and go to the desk and ask for when the next flight is and buy your ticket there. Obviously, it does not help with planning. It does not help with logistics. But if you want to be on a flight, apart from catching the very first flight of the day, then for many people, for me particularly, it just works easier for me to walk into an airport and say, when's the next flight? Chances are that there will be no spare seat, but I can tell that if the flight is going to be canceled, then you won't be on that one because you're buying the ticket for the flight that's going to go next. It just might be you should be ready to go and travel light, so nothing to check in. You're just going with carry-on baggage. What I'll also say about productivity and in a VUCA environment is make things not only smart, but make things clear. So when people are giving you descriptions and they use things like they, I would always say they who. When I hear things like soon, I will say soon when? Soon in 5 minutes time, soon in 10 minutes time, soon tomorrow, because definitions of soon vary. I'll get back to you in a couple of minutes. And I learned that the hard way when I was working outside Nigeria, because I told a few people, I'll get back to you in a couple of minutes. And less than 5 minutes later, 3 of them turned up at my desk. And I said, I'll get back to you in a couple of minutes. And one of them said, yes, couple, 2. This is now 5 minutes. Of course, I was coming from an environment where couple means maybe 1 hour, maybe 2 hours. So be clear about what you're saying. Also be clear about what you're thinking. Be able to think without defending. Be able to talk without offending. And that goes the same way in disagreeing. And when you've got a VUCA situation and you align that with productivity, it's likely that there are going to be differences in opinion. But you can have a difference of opinion without being a person who then becomes antagonistic. You can be in disagreement without being disagreeable. And those for me are very strong and very core measurements of productivity. And then we have this issue of JAPA. And the reason why I'm bringing JAPA into productivity is for those organizations who have to deal with transitioning of talent. We'll say that they are dealing with an environment where things are uncertain. You employ somebody, you train them up, you invest in them, and 2 weeks later, 2 years later, they tell you that they're leaving the country. And now, just like VUCA, JAPA has become cliched. Everybody wants to JAPA. But I say, wait a minute, JAPA is not new, the same way that VUCA is not new. My parents JAPA'd in the 50s and 60s. Everybody my age who was, of a parents who went for scholarships in the abroad in the late 50s and the early 60s, around the time of Nigeria's independence, probably understands JAPA because they left the country. They were not being driven out of the country. The education that they went to seek was probably not here then, but it then came when you had the universities of Ibadan and the Yaba colleges of tech, but they did not come back. They stayed. So it was a form of JAPA. It is just how you deal with it. And for me, the same way that you deal with productivity is that you cannot always teach productivity. You cannot always enforce productivity. You cannot buy productivity. What you can do is to create a business environment that makes it conducive for people to give you their best. And even if they do JAPA, they will JAPA with the mindset that if you need them, you can reach out to them. They will still respond. And guess what? The world has become smaller because we are working hybrid. So because somebody JAPAs doesn't mean that you cannot still get 1 or 2% of them to still contribute to your own organization, because they can work remotely if the laws allow it and if your regulations accommodate it. So I will not take JAPA to be a total loss of productivity to affect. I will just say be flexible enough to accommodate the new normal so that when it comes, you are prepared for it. And the final word on all this, I'm retired. I actually left my organization 3 years before retirement. So I've not yet reached retirement age, but I just believed that I was not as productive as I should be. And I didn't have an environment where I could do other things. So I left early. I traveled around, I ate fresh food, I did silly things. And then I came back to Faith Foundation to be the head, the first dean of the Faith School. So I claim that I do this partly as my own retirement. But I believe that I'm one of the most productive people that I know. I'm active in the Lagos Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Yusuf was talking about me being in the auto sphere. Yes, I was chairman of the auto group of Lagos Chamber of Commerce. I'm still the vice chairman of the membership of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce. I'm very active in the areas of faith organizations. I'm very active in welfare and NGOs. But I measure my own productivity. I should be able to leave the office at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 12 noon, 7 p.m., and still say to myself, I have done something that's productive, and you want me to measure it, I will measure it in different ways. Show you my phone log of who I phoned, Look at my emails of how many emails that I read or dealt with. It could also be in how many of my KPIs that I met. And if I didn't meet them, was there a reason why I didn't meet them? So in closing, I would say that when you have a way of charting productivity and you are dealing with a VUCA environment, don't deal with it as if it's new, as if you've never heard of it before. Deal with it as it's a new variable that you're just going to throw into a basket of things that were already there, and take a step back to unlearn, to relearn, and then to apply. Thank you very much for your time. Mr. Yusuf.
Thank you so much for the 30 minutes of incisive talk about everything that we've just had. And I have a 2-page, I don't know how to summarize 2 pages actually. I was going to say I'm going to summarize what you said, but I'm just looking at the notes I'm taking. It's 2 pages already. So how I'm going to summarize it, I don't know whether I should bother, right? But a few things that I have noted, right, includes that you have said that VUCA is not new. We should not look at this as a new thing. We should not be afraid to face it. All we just need to do is to take a step back, learn from whatever it is. Okay, so for example, the pronouncement about styrofoams in Lagos. So for a manufacturer of that, what does the person do? Is that the end of business for that person? No. I hear you say no. All the person needs to do is, okay, so how can I reapply my business so that I can still use the same products of styrofoam to do something else? And then I don't need to let my staff go. My staff don't need to be afraid of losing their job. That's what I hear you say, right? I also hear you say that we can actually measure productivity, or we can improve productivity by learning from opinions of everyone in the organization, letting people take ownership of their businesses in the organization, people taking responsibility for their actions and inactions within an organization. The leaders of the organization lead by example. It's not a do as I say, and not a do as I do. It should be a do as I do, not just do as I say. And that conversations should be clear and precise and smart. And then the most important one, which I can easily relate to a question I have for you down the line, toxicity. That is how to disagree respectfully. So those are the key points that I've taken from all of these conversations. And then while you were talking, you said something about the common denominator for productivity. You can't force it, you can't buy it. And at the bottom of that, after I've written those 2 things, I wrote at the bottom of it, I said, you can measure it and you can reward it. And human manager can help you do those 2. So that is where we are right now. And in going forward, we have had all of this, and then we'll just like to invite Felix to join us now, and then we'll take a few of questions. And as we go ahead, please, all our guests, please type your questions into the chat box. We will take the questions from there and ask Bambo and Felix these questions as we go along. We are doing that so that we can manage time. We don't want to keep people here beyond the 2 hours we promised. That's why I would like you to put the questions that we can take it along with all the questions we need to take, and then we can move along. Then just before we started, I had been corrected that the name of the organization Felix works with is Lane, not Lane, like I said. I had pronounced it thinking Accra, they speak English, Nigeria, we speak English, so it's got to be English. I just been corrected with that pronunciation. My apologies for the wrong pronunciation of the name. And so we take that going forward. So at this point, I'd like to also ask Felix to also take the mic with Bambo while I start off with the questioning. And of course, because Bambo, you did the presentation, the first question comes to you. And the question is like this. So I'm a leader in our organization. I create an agile mindset within my teams so that they can adapt quickly to changes. Then how can we then say that these two things, can I use these two things as a measure of productivity, the agility I've created in their minds, and the adaptability to things? Can I just base my productivity on those two things?
Okay, hi, good morning, Yusuf. Hi, everyone. Can I be heard, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Great, thank you. So just to start off, I'd like to just add on to the introduction that you gracefully gave me. Yes, the organization is Lene Services, or Lene HR, if you can put it. And I'm currently the unit head for learning and development here at Lene. So I think you used my earlier title with my previous organization, but that's fine. So also appreciation, gratitude, great thanks to yourself, Yusuf, and the team, and also Mr. Bambo for sharing such insightful nuggets to us this morning about VUCA. To start with, will just say that VUCA has been there for only God knows when, but it became pronounced, should I say, in 2020, after the COVID, where we could now see that out of the blue, businesses are impacted one way or the other by strange changes to our environment. So once you're a business and you set up, we do not work in isolation, and as such, both internally and externally, we find ourselves being impacted globally by the changes in our environment. Now, technology has also become something that also impacts us, and the fast pace at which technology keeps changing and improving our systems within our organizations is another factor that encourages the need for us to study what VUCA means and how it impacts on productivity in our organization. So to go into your question, you asked how leaders cultivate an agile mindset within their teams so they can quickly adapt to changing circumstances. Now, in all the discussions and all the conversation, the presentation by Mr. Bambo, we can see that the leadership sits in the center of it all because it sets the pace for the others to follow. So in cultivating an agile mindset within teams, I would say it will start from the leader cultivating a business mindset. We, in recent times, see the term being used in a lot of organizations that leaders are business partners, especially for the non-revenue generating departments like HR, finance. And the whole point of this is for leadership to now think like the CEO, think about how their inputs creates value for the organization in general. And how would they do this? They have to start thinking more value creation. So for instance, in HR, we just in the past realized that, or we're thinking that HR is more like a support function or an operational function. Now, how can HR now take a table at the strategic level and say, add value to the kind of work that the business operates? This can only be achieved if HR takes a look at the other functions and then see how they can support through recruitment, through training, through their revenue, should I say, reward and compensation, and so on and so forth, and demonstrate this. Now, secondly, leaders can cultivate agile mindsets by open communication more. Mr. Bambo alluded to this briefly by saying that you don't have it all in your mind and you work through people. And creating an environment for people to share their creativity, creating an environment for people to share their ideas, and establishing these strong systems to capture these ideas and innovative proposals goes a very long way to, cultivate and encourage that agile mindset within the teams that you currently manage. And then also the last thing I would want to add to this is that once you're encouraging people through open communications, once you're getting them to be more involved with the work, it is important to also look at how you motivate them, how you encourage them. And when I say this, rewards shouldn't necessarily be just about giving monetary compensation. It could go as long as recognizing the effort, the input, saying a thank you during meetings, trying to recognize organization-wide. So my organization, for instance, we have what we call the innovative team of the month, innovative team of the week, where we encourage people to, bring in more ideas, and then we celebrate them for the kind of input that they are making to the business and the value that they are adding to the business growth in general. And I believe once we, set our mindset and start inputting strategies like this, it goes to impact the overall productivity of our teams and the overall productivity of the organization that we currently lead. Thank you, Yusuf.
Thank you, Felix. From your answer, your response, there's a quick question. You've mentioned COVID. And since 2020, 2021, we hear people say remote work, on-site work, hybrid work, and all that. Now, for some organizations, they've actually struggled. We've had organizations who said that they realized that employees spend more time on other things than the work that they're supposed to do, right? But like Bambo said, does that necessarily mean that it affects productivity? So if I go to work, the office, I spend 8 hours, 9 to 5 at work, and I do 10 items. But if I work remote, I spend 2 hours on my computer, and I also do 10 items. In that regard, have I been productive? Have I cheated my organization of the time I'm supposed to have worked, right? So if we look at it from that perspective, would you say that I have been productive in absolute terms, or we want to just take it in a relative term that so long as it's met the targets or the KPIs, is being productive? Bambo.
Thank you, Yusuf. And before I touch on that, I would say that the advent of COVID and all its pressures on our work environment, our work culture, has, opened our eyes to the fact that businesses might strive. Businesses are going concerns, and as such, no matter what the business is faced with, we need to re-strategize and see what works for us. And when I say what works for us, the strategy that a particular one company might say institute might be different from what the other companies would institute. If you are a company that has your clientele more work, should I say real-time facing, or you have you have a lot of drivers you're managing, then really you might not want to, have them working from home and all that. So what I'm saying is that, yes, people are practicing it, and we don't have to just adapt it. We should see what best fits us, what works for us, and then adapt measures to also be able to continue being productive, continue being competitive. Now, to whether or not people are working from home and are being productive, whether or not, I would say that once your KPIs are set, basically, and I know Mr. Bambo would have a few things to add on to this, but once your KPIs are set, basically, and you've communicated very clearly, articulated this, and share the resources that the employee needs to be able to be very productive. I think for a leader, for a manager, for organizations, we should stop seeing productivity as come to the office, be present there, and let me see you doing the work. We should actually try and be more empowering to the people who are working for us. So if there's a work that can take 5 minutes for me to complete working from home, and I'm able to give back my deliverables, it shouldn't be a problem at all for an employee, for an employer or a leader. Once the deliverables are met, once you have your KPIs set, once you have your monitoring tools or your reporting tools set, and the technology is supporting and backing this, and then they are delivering on expectations, coming to the office, we have realized that, or the literature tells us that it is something that really doesn't predict productivity per se. Now, also, a challenge that companies are facing now is because they lack the tools to be able to measure. They lack the tools to be able to monitor. The goals that are being set are not smart enough. And therefore, once you evaluate, it becomes more subjective than objective. If you ask somebody to do something at a particular time and deliver it at a particular method or through a particular means at a particular amount, and it's very clearly communicated, and you provide the support to be able to achieve that goal, it is easy to have the conversation and say, Mr. So and so, what's the update on this deliverable? And this person can freely give you this results or deliverable. So I would say that it doesn't really matter where you work from. Productivity is just basically a measure of the inputs that we put in our work and then the expected outputs. Are we meeting this? Are these two marrying? And once the employee is on top of his or her game on this regard, I think we're good to go. So Yusuf, I don't know if I've been able to answer your question.
Yes, you actually have. Bambo, any opinion?
Yes, and I have a few, but these are not that I am disagreeing with what Felix has said. It's just as it was saying, I was making his comments and his earlier talk, I was jotting down things that readily came to mind, and in no particular order. When COVID started and people started working from home, many of us were not planning to work from home. COVID made us work from home. So I don't think anybody can claim that, they were visionary enough to bring up the whole idea of working from home. I dare say that many organizations, if not for COVID, will still be insisting that their staff report for duty 7:30, 8:30, 9:30. They stay in the office until 5:30, 6:30. Or in some organizations, you make sure you get in before the bus turns up. You make sure you do not leave until the bus leaves. And there's still some organizations like that. So when COVID came, COVID forced our hand in much the same way that a lot of these VUCA situations are forcing our hands to do things different. With VUCA, you will not tell a member of your staff to go into an area that's volatile because you will not put his life or your assets at risk, which means you are going to need to find another metrics to measure his performance. Because if you are saying 36 states in Nigeria, and I'm immediately telling you, well, take out all the states in the northeastern part of Nigeria, do you then tell me that I've not covered 36 states? Or do I say that, well, it should have been 32 states in the first instance because we've got 4 to 6 to 8 states that nobody's going to go to, or nobody wants to go to, or nobody should go to? If you hear that there's a train being attacked in Kaduna, would you then still insist that because I'm the area manager for Kaduna, that I still need to report for duty? Or am I going to be penalized if I do not go, when you know that my life could be at threat? So what I would like us to do is to temper some of these views and opinions with the reality. And I like the use of the word relative and absolute. And I'll say this by what one of my bosses, Koichiro Senju, told me. He has this habit of just walking up to my desk and says, Bambo, what's your best food? And I'm already thinking in my head, and he will say wrong answer. And I'll say, I haven't said anything yet. And he'll say, whatever you're going to say is going to be the wrong answer. So I'll now think of one answer that he can't really, argue with, and come up with one meal. And I'll say, that's my best food. And he'll say, okay, so let me get that right. When you wake up in the morning, you eat it. You can eat it in the afternoon. You can eat it in the evening. When you go for, a picnic, you are going to bring it out and eat it. And I'll say, I know now, but variations are different. He said, well, you called it the best. So is it really the best? Or is it the best in a particular circumstance? And that's my way of also looking at productivity. You need to look at it look at it being relative to circumstances, being relative to situations. Because if you say that I am not productive, and I'm saying that I'm very productive, but Mr. Felix and Mr. Yusuf, who are my team colleagues, have not delivered on their own areas, so I can't deliver on mine, does that make me unproductive? And that's why I'm saying that maybe productivity should be looked at as a relative thing rather than as an absolute thing. With that comment about COVID, I have another example. Martha, God bless her soul, the young lady that helps in the house, decided that she wanted to come to work from home, from her own house, rather than stay in the house that maids would normally do. So you wake up in the morning, you are working until when the time goes. And she decided that she wanted to stay outside. I said, fine. I said, you do know that you are giving up free accommodation. You do know that you are now going to have to take transport to get to your place of work, which is my house. You now know that, watching television on free subscription, you are going to lose it, because I would have paid for your, your satellite TV subscription. If the power goes, you'll be using the power that I'm using. The food that I'm eating most likely will be the food that you are eating, and all the likes. Martha, bless her soul, said no, she wanted that independence. And every other day, Martha will now tell you, power has gone. She hasn't got money for transport, and food is expensive. And I would still say to her, Martha, that will not affect the number of hours of work that you are meant to deliver, because now you are being unproductive because of a decision that you took in face of what I'll call common sense. And that happens a lot, because when staff say that they want to work remotely, and this is now even post-COVID, and we've now embraced it, do you then go back to the member of staff and say, wait a minute, Mr. Bambo, when you are coming to the office, we are paying you a salary that included your fare to get to the office, but now you are working remotely. Should we also consider an adjustment of your salary? Because now you are not taking transportation, or you are not taking it on a daily basis. I mean, obviously, inflationary pressures would change that. The removal of fuel subsidy would change that, at least in Nigeria. But for any other organization or country, if you're saying that you've gone from being in person in the office and you're now working most of the time remotely, do I need to make an adjustment two ways? For the coffee that I'm saving in the office, because you're no longer drinking the coffee in the office. The electricity in the office has gone down because not all the rooms are now being, made suitable for use. But do I then say I'm going to have to penalize you because we've just installed a 100 kVA generator for 100 people, and now 80 of them are working remotely? Not only are we now going to have a generator that's underused, we probably need to go and buy another generator, which is smaller, so that we don't consume unnecessary diesel. And that is why I'm saying that productivity should be taken in relative terms, but I'll also say in flexible terms, so that we don't draw up a list of matrices that are then difficult to measure because of variables that are not within our control. If the traffic regulatory authorities come up with a new law, everybody needs to put a basket in the car, everybody would apply. Nobody is going to say, well, under the Constitution, I'm going to argue it, because it will cost you money to get lawyers to defend you in the Constitution. You've wasted time, you've wasted resource. It would have been cheaper for you to just go and buy the bucket. But these things affect productivity, even if it is for you just to understand what the law asks you to do. So I'll say VUCA is not new. But in us measuring productivity, we need to be in a situation where we can make it relative. We need to make it flexible, and we need to make it real. And I'll probably say to make it simple. Some measures of productivity are so complex that they will need a Mr. Yusuf to deploy the whole of his office to measure productivity, which is fantastic, because I'm outsourcing that skill. I'm not spending time in an area where I have no sector specialism. But sometimes you now found out that making sure that it is perfect sometimes is not the only option. And I'll leave you, my last comments will be, if you are in an area where everything is okay, you have a good salary, you have a good lifestyle, you go to a hospital and they will schedule a surgery for you, come back in 3 weeks, they will prep you for surgery, anesthesia, you'll be 3 medical staff in the office, plus the matron, and then, intensive care. If that situation permits it. If you go into a war in Gaza and there is an explosion, you will go in with or without anesthetic or whatever it is. They will tie a piece of rope to your leg and cut it off. 5 minutes and they're moving you down the conveyor line to deal with somebody else. So sometimes it is the situation or the circumstance that we also need to take cognizance of when we are looking at these things. So for me, productivity is mainly an internal thing, but it's been affected and it will continue to be affected by environmental pressures and realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now to the big elephants, like I mentioned earlier, toxicity. So we have spoken to all these items of VUCA and how it affects productivity, performance, and all that. In this age and time, we hear the word toxicity. Some of those things we have described now are probably classified as being toxic now. So, Felix, as an HR person, I would like you to take that from the HR perspective. Bambo, I would like you also to look at it from the perspective of a business advisor, an entrepreneur, a trainer of entrepreneurs, an advisor of entrepreneurs. So how does one now relate? How does one step around this matter so that when you are setting up these rules, when you are setting up these methodologies and all that, you are not crossing the borderline from just doing what is right for your business into being toxic? Felix.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So I think the employee today has, should I say, a much more daunting task to be able to marry what their personal values, what their personal aspirations, what their personal motivation is towards work, to what the expectations of the work itself, the environment which they find themselves in, and then other pressures externally, how to marry the two, how to bring it all together and be able to thrive in this VUCA times. And we see this in our workplace with our relationships with our bosses. We see this in our workplace with our relationships with our colleagues, our peers. And it's something that more or less has come to stay, and HRs keep scratching their heads over how to be able to navigate this very, red-taped line of toxicity and how to, keep everybody appeased in the workplace and all that. But then, whilst we continue to live with these things in the workplace, whilst we continue to try and struggle with how to navigate these things, the first point of call in trying to resolve such issues, I would say, lies on the employee himself or herself. That's the first responsibility, to be able to build some level of emotional intelligence, build and master some level of goal setting and prioritization within your own environment, because the most influential person in your life is you yourself. And if you're not able to marry what you want with what you're currently dealt with, you first of all have a big mountain before you to move. So I'd say that first do a self-reflection, look at who you are, what is important to you, if it is family, if it is work, and even if it's work, how you want to grow in the hierarchies that you find yourself in, what you want to navigate, how you want to navigate to get there. Build some emotional intelligence, because the environment, affects you in ways that you do not expect, you do not welcome, but you know how to liaise with people, you know how to get things done through people, you know how to talk to people. Now, when I talk about prioritization as well, you know where you want to be in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. What goals you put before you, and what are you doing to achieve these goals? What are the motivating factors for you? What would you be able to, opportunity cost comes to play, what would you be able to accommodate and what can't you? So once these things are set and are very clear for you, you know what to do. Then the second responsibility lies with the organization, and then particularly with HR people, HR leaders. How do we make the environment very welcoming, very accommodating? How do we schedule work in these environments such that people are not burnt out, people are not stressed out, people are not overwhelmed, people feel appreciated, rewarded in the work that they currently do? Because it is supposed to be a very intentional and conscious effort. People have to be able to prioritize their health while they marry their drive to be very productive for you. So once you're not providing the tools for them to be able to do this, it becomes very challenging and more stress on them. Now, what are your policies around leave? What are your policies around employee well-being? What kind of flexible hours are you giving to your people to be able to, you know, take care of their work-life balance in such a way that you don't have clashes here and there? And then also there's the topic about people in the minority, people from diverse backgrounds who are also in the workplace. How do we bring policies and how do we make the place so that they are all accommodated? How does the nursing mother be able to freely attend to the pressures at home and also come to work and then also give their 100%? Does it mean that we look at maternity covers? Does it mean that we look at getting logistics for people to be able to be accommodated in the four corners of our office, or try and bring the work home and then still get them to be more productive? And then also, finally, I would say that in all this, and after all is said and done, right, you would need to know what to let go and what to take on. If you know you are in, say, a toxic environment, it means your values and then what the organization is offering doesn't marry. And your mental health is very important to you as well. So you have to know what to let go and what you want to manage. I would say you would try and then put in your best, try to please your bosses, trying to climb up the ladder. But in all this, you have to also adopt the culture of positive thinking, giving out very good energy out there. Because I'm a very religious person. I would say you can plan, you can put in all the works, you can wake up at 4 and then come back at 9. You can do whatever you want to do. But if you don't have also grace following you and then doing the right things at the right time, nothing will work and nothing will come to fruition. So Yusuf, this is what I'll say when it comes to toxic environments and how to manage relationships. You have to look at yourself. Environment has to also be conducive enough to be able to work and give your best. And then also try and, you know, have some kind of, you know, that religious backing. I wouldn't say specifically what religion, but you know what we believe in. We have faith, we believe in God. And I mean, see how that helps us in be able to navigate these relationships in the organizations that we currently work in respectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Bambo, your perspective.
Perspectives, you mean? Remember that my background is varied. I've worked in government, in practice, in a corporate organization, and I'm now working mainly for an NGO. And the dynamics that play out are different for each one of them. In the government departments, there's a lot of serving the people. And sometimes there's a trade-off between serving the people and how long and how well you're serving the people. With practice, it was fairly easier because you were talking about billable hours. How many hours can you charge to your client? How much was the fee income you were generating? With the NGOs, there's a lot more in balancing things. So you have to be conscious about age, about gender, about sex and sexual orientation and stuff like that. Now, if you throw that into the mix of toxicity, and I hope I don't lose my teeth by the time I finish this, you now start to realize that there are a number of variables that we are dealing with when we are talking about a toxic business environment or a toxic organization, because every dynamic that's playing out is not a set dynamic. You and I might have a toxic relationship. Our department might be toxic. Felix and I might have a fantastic relationship, and his own department and my department get on cordially. So there are various variables. It's not a set in stone situation. I would say that there are factors that can either increase or reduce toxicity. Culture or cultural differences. Same with religion or religious differences. And it could be the same religion, but different arms of the religion. Same with mindsets. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to the office environment because I'm at retirement age. If I'm dealing with a Gen Z, then we'll probably have very varied opinions about things. And it could be deemed that, you know, Mr. Bambo is just so old school. He's, you know, he's set in his ways. He doesn't bend. He doesn't break. And then there are things like that. And then we're dealing with our KPIs, because if I've got targets to meet and I'm driven to achieving those targets, then those I'm working with might feel that they're being pressured to the extent of them being afraid, to the extent of them being ill, you know, taking time off for work-related stress, that they actually leave the organization and leave the country. Or those people who just, you know, walked away from the office and say, that's it, I'm no longer working as an employee, I'm going to set up my own business and be my own boss. So you need to look at those areas. But don't forget that there's also other interest areas that you need to satisfy, whether you like it or not. If you're working for an organization, where do the shareholders come in? And if the shareholders are saying that you are not delivering value, do you then say, well, I can't really crack the whip to this for the staff to work because they are going to leave. And when they leave, we're going to have to now manage the transition of staff. But don't forget that when we talk about toxicity, we tend to talk about the toxic relationship in the organization. Many of us fail to address that sometimes you have toxic employees. So it's not the organization that's creating the toxicity. It's the employee who comes that's bringing the toxicity. And if you imagine putting a drop of milk in a glass of water, it clouds everything. You've got the employee who is constantly complaining about everything. It doesn't matter. Christmas hamper is not big enough. The work hours are too long. The air conditioner is not too cold. It's not cold enough, or it's too cold. You know, you want time to go and pray. You want time not to pray. You want time to eat. You want time when you want to end the meeting. That is a form of toxicity because it affects everybody. You have the employee who is a bulldozer. You need him because he gets things done. Unfortunately, those who are at the receiving end of him might not like it. So he's your best staff when it is to get things done. He will take on any job. But those he's working with don't like it because he's cracking the whip. And they're going to put not only the SDG and the ECG and the ESG and the Geneva Convention in front of him to say, oh, no, you can't do that. Now we're in an environment where we have people who will freeload. It is a form of toxicity because everybody else gets affected mentally, emotionally, because three of us are working. Mr. Felix and Mr. Yusuf seem to be the one driving. Mr. Bambo just comes in, he does his peripheral work, and then he disappears. But when it's time for sharing the benefits, he's the first on the queue. Those are a form of toxic employees. I did tell you that I'm going to lose my teeth by the end of this. Those are a form of toxic employees. So what I'll say is that in order to manage all this and to diffuse the situation, to dilute a toxic situation, is be as open as possible so that everybody is clear about expectations and you can manage them. That you are honest in what you are doing, so that it's not a case of do what I say, not what I do. And then to be firm, but to be fair. Or in the words of Jazzy B, it's be objective, be selective, and be an asset to the collective. Thank you.
Right. And maybe finally, the last question from me, I think that would make good timing. So maybe final question. I'd like both of you to also respond to this as well. And it's this: should productivity be confused or be attached to performance?
Felix, go first, because I'm still trying
Right, so
I'm trying to spell performance.
I don't know about confused, but I see a correlation or a relationship between productivity and performance, because it is through performance that we get the overall productivity that we require or we deserve. And I think this morning we've gone through the types of productivity metrics that we could see, what works for us and all that. Whether you want to see productivity as a measure of the customer base that you've been able to accumulate, whether you want to see productivity as a measure of the form of attendance that you have and all that. But in all this, to drive to get to that productivity level or measure that metric that you want to measure, you need people to be performing and performing in the standards or within the standards that you set for them, and perform also through the goals that you've negotiated with your employees. Because one thing that sometimes it is a miss for leadership or for managers is that we set the goals and we set the goals for the employee. We don't set the goals with the employee. So what happens is that it feels more like it has been given to them, and then whether they agree with it, whether they have the tools to do it, whether they can actually even perform, they do not. And at the end of the day, we see that they have low performance, which translates into low productivity for us. Once one member, one individual within the team is not performing, it translates into the overall productivity of the team, because we believe that teams are not working or individuals are not working in isolation. They're working in departments, in groups, and in teams as well. So what other companies are also trying to do to be able to bring everybody along so that we get that collective productivity is to make sure that your performance evaluations, your performance measurements are not just individual based, are not rewarded individually, but they are tied to the group productivity or the group performance. And as such, once at the end of the day, as a collective, we've been able to achieve what we set out to do, we can say that we've achieved high performance, which translates into high productivity. Now, once there's a negative correlation between the two, you realize that performance is low, and then in some very peculiar situations, you see productivity high. And these are not factors that you could attribute per se to, let's say, the individuals in your team. And these are, exceptional cases. Case in point, you can have a company that is running a monopoly in a very unique environment. And this you can see usually with, say, the public sector or, the public institutions, where no matter what, we have to rely on them. Say the electricity provider. In such organizations, you would see that they would be churning out their target, or will be productive, but not necessarily because they are performing or they are giving us good services as we require. And this is just because of the peculiar environment that they operate. What you will see also in the long run is that once there is a little introduction of competition in the system, which will not work in this VUCA environment, because people are competing, everybody wants to gain competitive advantage. Once you see a little introduction or a threat into the market that it currently operates, everything comes crashing down, everything comes crumbling down. So to sum it all up, I'll say that there should be a positive correlation between performance and productivity, because it is through the performance that we achieve the targets that we want. If there is a negative correlation, then work has to be done in such situations. You have to diagnose and see where the issues are, and then find very good, solid interventions to be able to bring people up to speed. That marriage has to be there for the organization to be very productive. Yeah,
Bambo,
thank you,
sir.
Yusuf.
Yeah.
Mr. Yusuf, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. We're waiting for you.
I thought I was the one that went first.
No.
Okay, then you're going to have to remind me what the question is.
Okay, so I asked, should we confuse or
productivity with
relate
performance.
productivity with performance?
I was trying to spell performance. No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't be confused. We might be using them interchangeably. But I think performance, in my opinion, and I'm not saying that I'm an expert in this area, I would say that productivity is probably more measurable. If you wanted to attach metrics, you'll probably find it easier if you're talking about productivity. For me, performance is more subjective because subjective in the instance is that you can take a step back and look at what I do and how I do things and make a judgment call on whether I'm a good person in terms of, work execution and the likes. But I think if you said, is Bambo a productive person? You will need to say, well, productive how? And if you took it back to where the word came from, does Bambo produce? You are talking about things that can be measured. How many, widgets, how many spanners, how many hours. You don't tend to use that when you say performance. Did Bambo perform well? He did. He performed exceptionally well. The measure of performance would then be a productivity ratio. He performed well. He produced 10 items. I doubt if you say that he produced well. He performed the dance brilliantly well. So for me, I would say they should not be used. They should not be confused. They might be used interchangeably, but I would say that productivity is more of an objective measurement and performance is more of a subjective measurement. Thank you.
Right. So, Felix, quickly, so that we can go before 12, right? Advice for application of technology in measuring productivity and performance.
Yes, so my advice would be technology has come and has come to stay, has come to make our work easier. It has come to make measurement of performance, productivity more objective. The tools that through technology we incorporate in our work has given us a direct point to say, or records to say these are the things we did, and because we put in this much, we've been able to achieve this much. So you would say even for recruitment, in recent times you've moved from the more, should I say, mechanical way of sourcing CV, getting people through, and we've adopted more technology intensive apps like the HR Manager, who gives us an ATS system to be able to track the CVs that come to source very well, to be able to be on top of wherever the process is on the should I say the timeline. Then also you see that in finance and how payroll is being done quickly, it's easier, the mistakes are limited. And all these things are because technology has come to improve our work, which means it has to be embraced. And we need people who now think in that direction. What that also means is that you'd have to invest more in training people. You'd have to invest more in upskilling people so that they can be able to be more technology savvy and be able to incorporate the technology that you provide for them in the work that they do, because you can procure the best of technology. You can bring in the best of the best. But once your people do not have the mindset to actually put it in use, it is a cost that will be just flushed down the drain. So you attach the advent of technology into your business to make it more, should I say, productive again, to make it quicker, agile, faster. And then you add the enhancing tools, give them the training that they need, whether on the job, off the job, whatever they need, to be able to use this so that we can realize the reason or the return on investment to be realized. So yes, Yusuf, that is what I think technology does for us.
Thank you. Bambo, your take?
My takes are very minimal because I said I'm a dinosaur when it comes to this. I still have my old reliable notepad that I use happily. So for me, technology is something that sometimes I see as clouding an already set of troubled waters. But the reality is still there. Technology has helped us to make processes easier. It's helped us to make processes quicker. It's helped us to be able to identify and ascertain things in a more scientific way. And that is where I then have a difference of opinion with how much technology should be involved in things that border on emotional intelligence, because tech is tech. There is no emotion in a lot of tech, even to the extent of us saying that we've got artificial intelligence. But I will say that don't forget that things about artificial intelligence is two things. It would have been somebody that wrote the original code. So you still have the human element in artificial intelligence. The other thing is that once artificial intelligence then becomes the barometer for measurement or is the go-to, then we are then going to then find ourselves in a conundrum, which was where you could have used emotional intelligence to temper a situation. Artificial intelligence doesn't necessarily give you that opportunity. So if you think of something like, I'm trying to think of a film that had a bit of artificial intelligence, iRobot. So if you think of iRobots, where the machines were being disagreed with, and were telling them what to do and what not to do, and the machine was saying that your logic is faulted. Then we are then going to have to agree that once we allow artificial intelligence, which is where technology is going to end, then it will not be easy for Mr. Bambo to turn up at 5 minutes past 1 o'clock and then say that it was because of the traffic or a domestic emergency that he was unproductive or he was late to a meeting, because technology would have mapped what you are doing. And I'm now looking at technology in its extreme. You would have mapped your trajectory that as at the time when you left the house, it was obvious you were going to be late. And you have done this consistently to the extent that your employment should have been terminated the day before you were employed. So the beauty of technology is that it eases the process. It makes a process possibly a bit less subjective, because it is now not, your heart that is doing the scores on a productivity metric. The downside is that it will get to a stage where the human element, the emotional intelligence, will have to be removed, become subservient, or even ignored, because technology is now taking over. And if we get to a stage where technology and robotics, which is part of it, then starts to do the things, then there will be no need to say that Mr. Bambo has failed consistently. He needs a performance improvement plan. It will just be, we never needed him in the first place. We've got a robot that can do the job of him and 10 other people. So clear the whole of his department and bring in the robots. And like I said, I'm a dinosaur, but you can see where my imagination goes when it comes to technology and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I think that we've just about covered all the items we have on the agenda. We've looked at the presentation. We've asked questions based on what we heard and some prepared questions. We've had perspectives shared, we have opinions shared, and I think that at this point we can begin now to start to round up. Thank you for reminding me, iRobot. That's Will Smith, if I remember very well. I think I've seen that movie, Will Smith, beautiful movie that is, yeah. So in all of this, I've taken away how to manage toxicity with respect to productivity and performance. Emotional intelligence is needed. Personal goals and aspirations, one needs to decide that. Employer needs to make environment a place where people want to look forward to go to. One also needs to be careful of that doer, that favorite staff, for who others perceive as the toxic person in the environment. One also needs to be careful and note the toxic employees themselves in there, who will be the ones who will bring the toxicity into the environment. Technology, which is my own forte. I hear two sides of it. Human Manager Limited is a technology company, HR and payroll solutions, and we've done it for 30 years. We've seen how it's affected businesses across various industries, across various cultures, because we've been in several African countries, Equatorial Guinea, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Benin Republic. We've seen how culture affects how people react to changes, especially when you introduce technology into businesses. And the first fear is always that it's going to take my job. But what we see at the end of the day is that it also just makes your job easier. So bringing it into measuring performance and measuring productivity should not be any different really from what we've seen from other things like Felix mentioned in terms of measuring payroll, doing things like your leave performance and all that. So then the other thing then again about okay, where's my note now? Okay, not confusing productivity with performance. I think it's clear enough that we know that performance leads to productivity. If every employee performs what they should, the organization will be seen to have been productive. And I think that on that note, we can then say that we have covered enough of this topic. And I would want to particularly thank the two of you gentlemen, Felix Agbo and Bambo Adebowale, for honoring us with your time and your rich experience to provide clarity to some of the things that we have spoken to today. We thank you, and we hope that the success that we have achieved with this will translate into subsequent series in our corporate catalyst conversations as we go along. And hopefully one day we will carry it from online and bring it into a live session where we will have all of us seated in physical and have a bigger conversation as it affects employees, employers, and businesses generally, and looking at various topical issues in that environment. As a close, again, Human Manager Limited is Africa's leading provider of HR solutions, payroll, financial services solutions, and like I said at the beginning, we're looking at becoming a hub for many other things that affect employee at work that can help to improve their performance and subsequent productivity. And that's why we have all these conversations. And so at this point, I'll say thank you once again to everyone, all our guests that I see, and our speakers today. We thank you for honoring us And we look forward to having you join us at one time or the other again. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
All right. Thank you very much, Yusuf.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, the recorded version will be placed on our YouTube channel, and will be notified.
Great. Well done, Yusuf.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so we are placing it on our YouTube version. I'm still speaking.